So I don't want us to think that just because ANACAONA was a pacifist, that the indigenous people did nothing about the Spanish. Because even though she didn't directly attack anyone, she did not prevent her people from attacking isolated Spanish settlements. And this is what Nicolás de Ovando was hearing, that the colony was in shambles because basically everybody was running amok. He was given special instructions from the Catholic kings themselves. Las instrucciones al comandador mayor, because that was the name or the title given to Nicolás de Ovando in early 1503, instructed him to do the following. Porque algunos dicen que sería bien que esos indios se repartiesen en pueblos, en que viviesen juntamente y no estuviesen despojados por los montes, y allí tuviese cada uno su casa apartada con su mujer e hijos y su tierra apartada en que sembrasen, y que en cada pueblo hubiese iglesia y capellán que tuviese cargo de los adoctrinar y en instruir en la fe. And the whole point of this was to bring the indigenous people closer to the mines, the gold mines, because that was the whole point, to mine that gold. But Jaragua and Higüey didn't have any gold. So these two places where the indigenous people were running to, were fleeing from Nicolás de Ovando. And both the caciques there, ANACAONA and the cacique from Higüey, didn't cooperate with Nicolás de Ovando. They allowed the indigenous people of other tribes to come to them for safety. It is believed that Nicolás de Ovando sent basically like messengers several times to convince ANACAONA to ally herself with him. Because yes, there were many indigenous people who went against their own people and allied themselves with the Spanish. But this isn't what ANACAONA wanted. She wanted them to work together. And she probably thought that if she could only meet him, maybe things would be different. So when he set out to Jaragua in 1503, around July, ANACAONA knew he was coming. Because this was supposedly a diplomatic visit. We can imagine the preparation. She probably prayed to her God for guidance and visited La Sabia Madre in Yuboa. She probably also consulted her semis, the semis that lived in the Yucayeque. She probably performed the Caoba ceremony with her semi, asking him or her, we don't know what semi they had in her Yucayeque, but asking for guidance, asking it to speak and guide the people and tell them what they needed to do. We can also say that maybe this was what the Sami had told her, to just be passive, to wait, to not fight back, to just welcome these strange people into her village and allow whatever happened to happen. She probably sat with her other caciques and cacicas, having discussions, making plans, how they would treat him, what they would do to receive him, the meals they would prepare, the areitos they would sing. They probably thought, you know what, let's just wow him. They probably thought that their customs, their food, their way of life would wow Nicolás de Ovando the same way it wowed Bartolomé and Roja. But this dude was made of something else. We know that the caciques dressed in a very elaborate way. We can assume that ANACAONA was no different. However, we don't have anything written about how she was dressed, because these people didn't care. Ovando and his men arrived at the Yucayeque. They received him much in the same way that they received Bartolomé Colón, with food, song, and dance. They placed Ovando in the cane, and ANACAONA and her people then presented him with hunted animals to eat, with fish from the sea that was still 6 miles away, with the finest of cassave. They also fed their horses. And Bartolomé says that they also had araitos, parties, happiness, and a ball game, el bate. It seems that Ovando was there for several days, because it says that on a Sunday, Bartolomé de las Casas records that on a Sunday, he had his men get on the horses. They then pretended to start a game, basically like a military simulation. ANACAONA supposedly said the following, that she wanted to watch. He then told her he had something important to tell her and her people. Could she call them all to the cane? And so she did. So they all packed the cane and sat within it. But Ovando's men were doing something strange. They were circling the cane, outside of it, on their horses. He had also instructed some men that were on foot to go inside the cane as well. He had told them that when he touched the gold chain that was on his chest, that was the sign to begin tying all of the caciques, including ANACAONA. And he gives the sign, and they unsheath their sword, and ANACAONA and her caciques began to scream, and their screaming alerted the villagers outside of the cane, and all hell broke loose. They began to run. ANACAONA's daughter and granddaughter managed to escape, and they ran and ran and ran. They left all of the caciques that had been bound inside of the cane, and only ANACAONA was removed. They then proceeded to light the cane on fire. Diego Mendez was eyewitness to La Tarde. He described the panic and the bloodshed. He says that about 82 caciques were unalive that day. Oviedo says it was 80, and La Casa says that it was double that amount. Las Casas says that the fire was so great that only ashes remained of the cacique. Those who didn't manage to flee, many were unalived, as we can imagine, but I'm not going to glorify what the conquistadores did. They've had that already. Know that some were taken as slaves, because even Bartolomé de las Casas received an indigenous man who had escaped La Tarde Roja de Jaragua. Bartolomé says that the excuse that Ovando gave for this massacre was that ANACAONA and her caciques were thinking of attacking him in Santo Domingo. But La Casa says that that was a lie. They had enough men and horses to easily take over 100 islands. He says, no, the real reason that Ovando hated ANACAONA and her caciques was because it was very clear that she did not fear him. And that bothered Nicolás de Ovando because the Spanish had always ruled through fear.